What's going on, guys? Tuo Cruz here. In today's video, we're going to be talking about setting up your spin bike with ZWIFT. Another thing I want to talk about in today's video is the advantages and disadvantages of using a spin bike on ZWIFT. I've been doing it for about a month now, so I've got a pretty decent opinion. I've been doing the racing, I've been doing the training programs, and I've just been doing regular riding. So I was looking for a good solution to ride my bike inside. And the big problem for me is I live in Japan, so I needed a solution that was super quiet, and I didn't have all the money to invest in all these new awesome smart trainers that are out there on the market. And that's where I sort of came up with the idea of using a spin bike, because spin bikes are super quiet and they don't use any power. So those are two great points right there. But when I first searched on the subject, there wasn't much information about spin bikes and ZWIFT, so I was kind of swimming in uncharted territories. But I'm happy to report that this solution has been working perfectly for me, and it can work for you too. So let's go into what's required. What do we need to get this setup to work? So of course, the first thing you need is a spin bike, and it doesn't really matter what spin bike you have. Most of them are pretty similar and have a lot of the same parts. You can have a low-end one, you can have a middle-end one, or you can have a high-end one. It doesn't really matter. The one I have doesn't have any electronics on it. It just has a simple flywheel. But one advantage of my spin bike is that it has a unique style handlebar, so you have regular drop bars, you have the triathlon bars, and I chose this one intentionally because I didn't want any of those extra gadgets on there. I don't need a speedometer because the way that we connect this to ZWIFT is with a power meter. So when you connect to ZWIFT, you need one of two things, a power meter or a speed sensor. The speed sensor, of course, being the fallback option if you don't have a power meter. Everything on ZWIFT is done based on power, so really you don't want to be doing ZWIFT with a speed sensor. You're not going to be able to get an accurate gauge of how you're doing in the races, and so you're better off using some sort of power meter. And to my knowledge right now, there's two different types of power meters that you can connect on a spin bike. The one that I'm using is a pedal-based power meter. So I've got the Favero Assioma power meter pedals. I made a review video for those earlier, so if you're interested, you can go check those out. These are great. You just spin them on, and the charge on these is awesome. You can use these for pretty much a full month with a decent amount of riding, and I don't really have to charge them. I just calibrate them every once in a while, and you can just twist them off, put them on the other bike. So if I want to ride my road bike outside, right now it's winter, so I'm not riding my road bike much outside. It's mostly mountain bike, so there's no problems there. But switching these over to other bikes, super easy, no hassle. So I love the pedal-based power meter solutions. The other one that theoretically can work, but I don't know anyone who's done it, is you switch over the crank set and you use a crank-based power solution. So this of course depends on the spin bike that you have and if it's compatible with regular cycling crank options like that. But most of them should be compatible with some of the crank arm solutions out there, but just save yourself the trouble and go with the pedal-based solution. I recommend the Favero Assioma pedals. Anyway, that's all you need to get going on ZWIFT. So yeah, it's really that simple. All you need is the power meter and the bike. You just hook up your computer like normal. And for me, I just made another big purchase. I was looking for some sort of stand or some sort of table that I could use to put down my computer in front of me while I ride. I ended up dropping the it's actually $350 here in Japan on the Wahoo standing desk, and it was pretty pricey, but I'm so glad I made this purchase. I use this thing for everything. I use it for standing and working when I'm not cycling, and I can quickly move it over to the bike when I need to use it there. So love this desk. I wish there were some more slightly cheaper alternatives out there, but there doesn't really seem to be much on the market right now. So yeah, going into the advantages of this setup, one of the main advantages of using a spin bike with ZWIFT is just you have a dedicated bike for your indoor riding. For anyone who's experienced some sort of mechanical, which pretty much every cyclist out there has experienced, no, it's not fun to deal with. And if something happens in your bike, you break a chain, even if just some part malfunctions and your shifter doesn't work, and you might not be able to use that until your bike shop gets it repaired for you. So the advantage of a spin bike is these things never break down. It doesn't matter if your main bike breaks down, you always have this bike to fall back and rely on. So to me, that's just huge points right there. One of the big things I'm trying to change this year is stay more motivated, ride more consistently, and just have less excuses. And if I don't have to worry about mechanical troubles, then that's just one less excuse right there, and I can be more consistent with my training. The other advantage I mentioned earlier is, of course, the silence. These things are super quiet. If you don't know, the spin bike setup is just a rotating flywheel, and you apply a sort of soft feather cushion to it. So it's pretty much no sound at all. There's no sound from the drive chain or internal parts. It's just from the contact of the feather to the flywheel, so super quiet. Another advantage of the spin bike is there is pretty much no maximum resistance level. So some of these smart trainers, some of these other trainers out there have a maximum resistance level that you can put out. This doesn't really matter for most people because most people can't put out more than 1,000 or 1,500 watts. But if you can, then a spin bike is pretty great because you're gonna give up before the spin bike gives up, if that makes sense. Another big advantage of the spin bike is the adjustability. So I live with my wife. My wife also enjoys cycling, and if she wants to use the bike, we can easily just adjust the position. We just need to untwist it, move the saddle up or down to her position. You can't quite get 100% exact the same position as your main bike, but you can get it pretty close, and to me, it's comfortable enough. But if you're really specific about this stuff, that might be a disadvantage for you because the adjustment points do have specific spaces between them, so you might not be able to get exactly the position that you're looking for. This is a good point to go into the disadvantages since we're already sort of starting talking about those. So a disadvantage of having a dedicated bike inside your house or home is it takes up space. I live in a tiny apartment in Japan, and space is pretty limited, and I have no idea how I managed to convince my wife to give me this dedicated space in our living room for the spin bike, but fortunately she ended up liking it herself and she saw the value in it. So but not everyone will be able to get their wife or partner to follow along with having a dedicated bike in your living room. So this might not work for everyone, and the appeal of having a trainer and putting it in the closet and just pulling out when you need it and pulling out your bike when you need it, that might be better for you. The other disadvantage of the spin bike is it's really heavy, so it's hard to move. Hopefully you're not gonna have to move that thing. I don't plan on moving this thing really ever until we move here maybe, because I have no other place I can put it. So that's not a problem once you get it set up. Speaking of the setup wasn't too bad. It took us maybe about 30 minutes. We made a fun video about getting the package, installing it. So if you want to check that out with me and my wife installing the spin bike, you can check it out. Another advantage I mentioned slightly earlier was that this thing doesn't use any power. So if you're worried about that, you have all these outlets that you need to worry about, plugging in your laptop, plugging in some other tech devices that you're using, plugging in your fan. You might be running out of plugs. So the great thing about this thing is it doesn't require any power, so it doesn't generate any extra heat. One thing about cycling in Zwift in the summer and in the winter is you overheat like crazy when you're cycling indoors, so we don't really want to be generating any more heat around our surroundings where we're cycling. So the good thing about the spin bike is these things don't really generate any heat. It's just the flywheel and the cushion, so there's no problems there. Another disadvantage of the spin bike is going to the style of resistance. So because this is a flywheel, when there's low resistance, your legs keep moving and they don't really stop. So if you've ridden track before or velodrome before, it's a pretty similar feeling to that, where your pedals are more connected to the wheel itself. It's not 100% the same, but it's a pretty similar feeling to that. So when you're spinning at a low resistance, it feels great. You can feel like it's forcing you to get a good pedal stroke. It's forcing you to move quickly. The disadvantage of this comes when you start putting in high resistance. So when I start cranking this thing down near the end of a sprint in a race in Zwift, I feel like if I sort of ease up on the pedaling just a little bit, it's instantly going to stop the flywheel, and it just really hurts. So it doesn't quite simulate the exact same feeling that you have when you're cycling on the road. When you stop cycling on the road, if you ease up for a second, you can just start pedaling again and there's no problem. But once you have this brake style resistance, if you stop pedaling for a second, it's gonna stop. And you're gonna have to start over from scratch on a fully resisted brake pad on that flywheel, and let me tell you, you're not getting back after that. So in terms of sprinting workouts like that, it's really hard. You're just kind of one and done. Once you're done with your sprint, there's no coming back from that. You gotta be a bit responsive. And this is the other disadvantage, changing the gears. With the road bike, you can change your gears with your shifter. With the smart trainers, they have the automatic changing of resistance for the terrain that you're on. And unfortunately with the spin bike, you have to do this manually. This is really easy to do though. It's usually just a little spin knob, so you just twist it left or right, depending on where you're going. So usually when I'm riding on Zwift, if I see I'm climbing a hill, I'll just add more resistance. It just takes a second and you're done. And if I'm going downhill, I'll just reduce the resistance a little bit there. Of course, again, this has advantages and disadvantages. If you're training for more of like time trial stuff for flats and you want to get consistent power profile, you don't really need that mode in the smart trainers, and just being able to do a consistent power, not sort of worrying about these virtual climbs and just focusing more on getting your specific workout. If you have a target workout of trying to maintain 300 watts for 5-10 minutes or whatever, it's much easier to do with this kind of setup. You can get exactly the power that you need, lock it in, and don't really worry about those hills. Of course, based on different positions, you use different muscles. So when you're climbing, your position changes, the stress on your muscles changes a little bit. That's why there's so much popularity with these new, like the Wahoo, what's it called? The kicker stand up front, where you can change your angle on your bike and you can use those different muscles, which trains you better for hill climbing if that's your target. Unfortunately, you're limited on doing that with a spin bike, unless you just sort of put blocks in the front of your bike and just ride like an uphill position for the entire ride, but you can't change it mid-ride. So yeah, this is pretty new technology though, so you don't really need to consider that too much. You'll see with my spin bike, I've swapped out some of the parts. So I put on my own Road Physique saddle on here, so most of these parts are pretty compatible. You can change out your pedals to what you like, you can change out the saddle to what you like, and on some setups you can even also change out the handlebars, but that depends on what spin bike that you're going into. Overall, I'm very, very satisfied with this setup. I couldn't ask for more. It was super cheap. The bike itself was about $400. I already had the power meter pedals, so I didn't really need to spend anything extra for that. And then my regular Zwift account. So way cheaper than spending over $1,000 on one of those new smart power meter trainers. I am still really excited about that technology, but I want to wait till I have a little bit more money, and I want to wait a little bit until that technology advances a little bit further. So here we are spinning without any resistance. You can see if I try and stop pedaling, my legs still are moving. That's because of the heavy flywheel on here. So let's try adding some resistance. Right now we're at about 100 watts, 90 RPMs. The other great thing about these pedal-based power meters is they include a cadence reader, so you don't need anything extra there. Let's move up. 200 watts, not really much difference in sound. 300 watts. Whew, I didn't warm up yet. Here we are, 400 watts, and even if I stand up and sprint, no real difference in sound, but you can see once you stop pedaling, once this brake is activated, it's really hard to get this moving again, so you got to drop this down to a low resistance and bring your speed back up. So one of the disadvantages if you're going for a sprint effort, but it's perfectly fine if you're just trying to maintain certain target watt zonage or work on improving your FTP. Alright guys, that's going to be it for today's video. I got to get continuing on with today's ride, today's workout. Be sure to follow me over on ZWIFT. Give me a nice thumbs up, or on Strava as well. Looking forward to some kudos. Hope you guys found this video useful. We'll be making more videos about ZWIFT, more videos about cycling, and of course life in Japan. And of course a big thank you to all of our supporters over on Patreon who help make this channel possible. If you're interested in helping support this channel, go check out the link down below towards our Patreon page. And we'll see you guys in the next video. Later guys.